project developer for the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Media Center at UT. And his research focuses on linguistic variation, language acquisition, bilingual grammar, and learning interactions in heritage language learning. And for those of you who know who Chio Nishida is, he's working with Chio. Lidia Huerta. Did I just hear that you're from Guadalajara? Yes. She finished her PhD at UT last year and is a lecturer of Spanish at the University of Texas at Austin. Her teaching areas focus on teaching Spanish for Spanish heritage learners, Spanish and Portuguese for professional purposes, translation, and the cultural aspects of international business. Her areas of research focus on, hope I get this right, violence, ethics, sex trafficking, and globalization through the analysis of Mexican and Spanish contemporary literature, film, and art. And then Joshua Frank, who knows Rafa, is a PhD student in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and a language instructor in the Spanish bilingual bicultural program. His previous and current research primarily focuses on advanced Spanish-English bilingual speakers, and he's specifically interested in the role of cross-linguistic influence, age effects, and input conditions in the acquisition of Spanish and English WH questions. So let's give a round of welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Martin, for that introduction, and it's a real honor for us to be here today, and we just really look forward to this presentation and hope that you will get something out of it. We'll be talking about, well, here's our title, Bilingualism and Biculturalism in the Spanish foreign language classroom. Of course, we don't really mean foreign, do we, right? I mean, a heritage speaker with background with the language, Spanish, and the culture to varying degrees wouldn't really be considered a foreign student by any means. So maybe we just brought that there, italicized it, just to bring it to the forefront at the beginning. What is characteristic of heritage speakers, heritage language learners, is their variability, their diversity, how different they are, and what they bring to the classroom. That's sort of the main theme of our talk today. We want to bring this individual variation to the forefront, whether it's through classroom activity, discussion, instruction, but also talking about theory, bilingual acquisition theory, and combining those two, sort of bridging the theory and the instruction. So we have a couple of activities in your packets, actually more, probably 4 or 5, that we hope you'll be able to use and implement. And they're really, while there may be specific tokens, they're sort of skeletons for sort of frameworks for you to just get creative and develop them further. So please, if you have questions on those later on, we can discuss those at the end. So let me continue here. As I briefly mentioned, we have 2 goals. Our first, the more explicit goal, is to just share some activities that we use in the Heritage Language Learner classroom. We'll be discussing 2 word order activities and 1 lexical variety activity, where we really elicit this difference, the diversity of the students. We celebrate it, and we develop metalinguistic knowledge through that interaction. And then our sort of secondary goal, but no less important, is bridging this gap between bilingual language acquisition theory and then the bilingual classroom instruction. So let me continue on here. That's me, a few pounds lighter, but no. So to begin with this sort of secondary goal that's less explicit in our presentation, bridging the gap between language acquisition theory and then the classroom instruction. We're going to really be emphasizing individual differences, bringing them to the forefront and that discussion. So it's difficult to discuss 25 years of language acquisition history in 2 minutes, but I'm going to attempt to do that. Beginning already in the 80s, we have a seminal article by Biculturalism where he discusses the fundamental difference hypothesis. And this is sort of a deficit perspective that nowadays we want to not discuss too much. We want to celebrate difference as opposed to say, well, second language learners or just non-monolingual native speakers are characterized by deficits, or there's deterministic failure. They don't reach this control marker that we artificially sort of place for them. Nevertheless, the idea of individual differences is already here in place. The idea that controls, these native speakers, these monolinguals are characterized by uniform success. Right? We all learned our first language very well, perfectly, I guess, not really, right? And then second language learners or bilinguals in general don't quite meet that bar, and they all get to a different spot. Their end state can be anywhere from target, maybe, maybe not, to just beginning exposure with the language. Then, and of course, Lydia White discusses this much earlier, but here's a nice review article. Discusses, well, why do we have this deficit perspective? Anyway, bilingual grammars are just that. They're different. They are rule-abiding. They're constrained by universal grammar. Why are we talking about deficits and not just differences? And why don't we have bilingual targets, more proficient speakers from which we would compare these beginning bilinguals, these introductory heritage speakers? And then, just to conclude this short discussion, nowadays, an article by Birdsong, Dabrowska, they continue this idea of individuals and say, why in language acquisition research do we average the groups, right, and then compare the means and not do a deeper investigation into the individual variation, where we might have control speakers that don't follow the theory, maybe on average they do, but this theory that's laid out for them, why are they not following what they're supposed to, what's prescribed to them? And then we may have second language learners or heritage speakers that are performing natively. And these cases aren't negligible, they aren't exceptional. These are the cases we precisely need to analyze and investigate to learn more about how language works and what is possible. So this is a full movement away from the deficit perspective that we started with. So just to bring this language acquisition theory to the classroom really quickly, to apply it, student one, maybe the heritage language learner environment, may say, well, this sounds right to me. And then a second speaker may say, well, I don't think so. I prefer to say it this way. And you'll see examples of this in Lydia's Lexo Variety activity, which is very, very entertaining, and your students will love it if you implement it. Okay, so given this interaction, we have a teaching moment potentially. Right? We can ask our students, why does it sound right? Why doesn't it sound right? Are both forms correct? We want to bring these differences to the forefront. And our goal, we think that if we do that, right, we'll be able to develop metalinguistic knowledge, we'll be fostering a general openness and acceptance of difference, and we'll be advancing general critical thinking skills, which are all goals that most of us have in our language instruction classrooms. So, just to recap, triggering points of divergence, and there are many. Our heritage language learners come in with completely different experiences. What generation, what state, what country, what level of proficiency. Foster this discussion. You have activities in your handout. And we think that helps us achieve our goals, which I just mentioned. Okay? So now I'm going to talk about one specific activity that you have, you can find within your packet. No need to search for it now. Mine is word order. Jesse is also looking at word order. And he designed a fantastic sort of elicitation, way to elicit word order differences that can then lead to interaction, discussion, reanalysis, rehypothesizing or hypothesizing for the first time. You'll be looking at adverb placement, right? And I'm looking at subject-verb conversion in WH questions. So just a little background about the WH questions. Several researchers, going back to language acquisition theory, have found persistent difficulties through experimental tasks in the acquisition of interrogative inversion in embedded contexts. Okay? This has been argued to be due to processing constraints, perhaps burden on working memory. Right? This would explain why there's difficulties here and not here, perhaps. Could also be input conditions. How frequently are we really exposed to embedded questions versus matrix questions? And then finally, just the derivational complexity. So generatively speaking, is English an initial step that's transferred into Spanish, and so we have inversion in some instances others. So what we have here, we have a verb, subject, word order, VS. Here we have just the opposite, in what is otherwise a very similar structure across Spanish and English. Matrix constructions are slightly more complicated in the sense that we have dummy to inversion, dummy to insertion. We have inversion of the verb and the subject, but not of the lexical verb, so just of the dummy do here. While in Spanish, you have the exact same thing going on in the embedded context as you do in the matrix. You have VS, where V is the lexical verb. So just to look at that briefly. Okay, so now going to, and you have these frameworks within your packets, the lesson plan template. Given these differences, as the research has shown us, we think, well, this is a nice place to start. One of many places where we could trigger difference and then create discussion. Okay? So we have a template developed by Jesse, and I'll talk much more about it. Begins with a scrambling task, or almost just a dehydrated sentence task. In experimental tasks, it's known in many instances under that name. The only difference is you can sort of take little elements and have them add it in when they're forming their sentence. You can leave the verb unconjugated. And these are all things you can even look at in terms of your research and classroom interaction. But we wanted to focus on word order and subject, verb, and version. So everything's given, except the words are out of order. Okay? We asked them to respond in the most logical way, they deemed correct. And then part two, after they've answered these 6 to 8 questions, they're then asked to switch with a partner. Okay, these can be strategic pairs, there's advantages to that, or just partners that they're comfortable with, people they sit with in class, peers, friends. There's really advantages to both. Okay, if you want to compare proficiencies and you know there'll be lots of interaction when people have different backgrounds, then you can also strategically pair them. Okay, and we have them, again, another experimental task framework, sort of determine the acceptability of their partners' formations. So we might have well-formed, not well-formed, unsure. We've also used a 5-point scale, I believe, right? Which is even more sensitive. Okay. But this, either way, works fine. I believe you have the 5-point scale in your packet. And then paso tres, then you discuss your judgments with your partner. Okay. And it's optional to record them doing this. This can be a very good lab type formation. We did that so that we could transcribe what they said. They can listen to their intonation if you want to focus on that, which is very important, especially in these contexts. Are they producing it as a direct quote or an embedded? Because I would change the word order. But that's cool. We want this variability that'll just create a rich discussion. Okay, so our research questions, we have 3. We'll be focusing on the 3rd one. But first, do heritage language learners have trouble acquiring subject, verb, and version, as the literature suggests, especially in embedded contexts? Do heritage language learners resolve word order disagreements in paired discussions? So you can sort of have a step 4, I gave you 3 steps, a step 4, and now that you've had this discussion and done these activities, what's your final answer? Were you convinced by your partner? Have you changed your mind? Are you sticking with it? Okay. That's this resolve notion. And then finally, we'll be focusing on today, at least in my section, do heritage language learners form and test hypotheses about language, both related and unrelated to the specific linguistic structure? That's the question that we'll be focusing on. Okay? And this would, of course, require recording, transcription, which on the back of your first page, you'll find some of that information. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So a working hypothesis, if there is disagreement in the paired interaction, then the following discussion will force the student to explain why she believes what she does, okay? In this space of difference, of disagreement. And this will promote hypothesis formation, testing, the development of metalinguistic knowledge, and then just a general awareness of difference. And especially if they're both proficient speakers, they're both confident, well, they have to really face this difference. Okay? So the 2 participants I'll be focusing on today, and the reason is because actually one of them misinterpreted the task, and still they got so much out of it, so I wanted to sort of bring this to the forefront. Right? Everyone sort of takes a task or a classroom activity in a slightly different way, but there's still a lot of benefit that can be derived from the task. So we have Orlando and Alejandro. Let me just tell you a little bit about them. Orlando, I'm planning on pursuing a career in education, and I want to be able to be efficiently fluent in Spanish. I feel that especially in Texas, I will need to use these skills with Hispanic students and parents. I feel that by being bilingual, my opportunities for work and other advantages will open up for me, thus having a more successful career. So this is a very well-motivated student. He scored a 39 out of 50 on the DELIT proficiency exam, so he's just about at that advanced level. He grew up speaking Spanish in Dallas. Okay. Then Alejandro, these are pseudonyms, of course, and Alejandro, when asked why he is taking this language course, well, to have some extra credit in grammar and vocabulary, sorry, extra practice. Another language like Spanish can be very useful in the workplace in the future. Personally, I hope to meet some new friends in this class. I want to speak Spanish with them every once in a while and perhaps hang out with them. So also well-motivated, perhaps for different reasons. But he scored a 43 out of 50, advanced, actually born in Mexico and moved here at the age of 5. Okay. So moving right along. Let's look at just a few results here from Orlando. 39 out of 50 from Dallas. Here's how he produced these. He didn't have any troubles, which sort of goes against what some of the research is saying. He had no problem. Jorge le preguntó a Selena cuando verb, subject, verb, subject, verb, subject. He's not having any issues with putting these words in the right order. And he also didn't in the matrix examples. Okay? So I don't want to take up too much time with these examples. We'll go to Alejandro now, who didn't have any problems in the embedded either. But then in the matrix, you have to really consider what's going on here. Okay, he says, Maria con quien cantó la canción. He says, Dani cuando. Okay, so we have the subject at the sentence initial position. And also we have Jorge escuchó la música al oído. So we have a WH in situ example. Well, something we need to consider. How did this discussion go? If you will refer to your handout, just the inside of the front page, I've transcribed these two of the examples. The last one is the WH in situ. The first one is just one of the examples where he had where Alejandro had the subject in the initial position. And I've interpreted some of these. I'll just read the interpretations. Orlando is explaining why he judged Alejandro's sentence as odd and offers how he would have written it. Very early on in the conversation, they are showing good alignments. Alejandro explains that he did not end up responding in a certain way because he was confused. Okay? Only the name Maria is capitalized. So he's thinking this needs to be in the sentence initial position. Okay, that wasn't the idea of the task, right? He thinks this means Maria must start the sentence. Orlando jumps at the chance to provide feedback. He provides information about the content of Alejandro's production. Okay? He explains that, well, actually, if there were a pause, a comma, and more context, then maybe we could start with Maria, right? In the sense of a direct quote, right? Maria, con quien, okay. And so Alejandro now agrees with this subject-verb inversion idea, sort of realizes, yeah, maybe I misunderstood or I interpreted it in a different way, which Alejandro does have a tendency of doing, interpreting things in his own way. But we all have different students. And then Orlando, in number 2, where we have the WH in C2 and the subject initial for Alejandro. Orlando didn't have any issues. Orlando again questions Alejandro's lack of subject-verb inversion. Okay. He also questions the WH in C2 elements. Things get more interesting still. Orlando begins to analyze the word order after the verb. Okay. Perhaps Orlando is not used to calling the words by their part of speech or their function. He says verb instead of noun. He's sort of confused here, in Spanish, of course, right? He thinks that there's a difference between nombre and sustantivo, and then finally Abraham offers the word subject, okay? In reality, nombre is an ambiguous expression here, right? Are we discussing someone's name, the word noun? What are we talking about? It appears that Orlando is trying to say that the subject appears before the object, just that it sounds better this way. And Orlando wishes to confirm that they are indeed on the same page. Okay, so he provides a comprehension check. Okay, entonces, después del verbo va el nombre. And then he gives the example. ¿Dónde escuchó Jorge la música? Okay? And demonstrates alignment by responding yes. Okay, a couple of references in the packet there. So just to summarize the entire activity between Orlando and Alejandro, and I think we saw with several other pairs. Co-constructed metalinguistic knowledge includes things like direct versus indirect speech discussion, interrogative inversion, subject, object, word order, post, verb, parts of speech, el verbo, versus nombres, sustantivos, sinónimos, word functions, subject, object, and then WH movement versus WH and CT. And also, co-constructed hypotheses related to this knowledge, direct speech. To speak as somebody allows preverbal subject, but a pause would be required in written form, a comma. So for example, Jesse, ¿qué estás haciendo? This comma, this pause. Number 2, embedded matrix WH questions display obligatory interrogative inversion. This is something that they produced, okay? Maybe this is the canonical form. Maybe this isn't necessarily. Maybe there's a teacher follow-up where you want to discuss, well, is this always the case? The subject should come directly after the verb, okay, before the objects, if any are present. This DSO, another opportunity for teacher interaction, teacher-led post-discussion. And then in WH questions, movement of the WH element is favored over WH and CT. These are all things that were formed by the task, by even interpreting the task in their own way, just having this discussion of differences. Okay? Now, certainly I do believe a teacher follow-up that one would want to have is just the idea of subject-verb inversion, and that it's not characteristic of all dialects in Spanish. Okay? This is a nice follow-up to sort of discuss differences and say it's okay, and everyone does things differently. We have the bilingual explanation, and we have the monolingual explanation. I think it's always important to share this with them. So for example, the bilingual answer, well, we talked about the research, what it says. Several bilinguals do not invert the subject and verb in embedded WH questions, according to several scholars in bilingual language acquisition. Why? Well, it could be input conditions, processing constraints, derivational factors, transfer from one language to the other. Things that are important to share, to say that no, you're a bilingual. We're going back to Lydia White here. Right? You're a bilingual, it's okay. You're different. You have a bilingual grammar. You don't need to compare yourself to a monolingual. And then, okay, you want to compare yourself to a monolingual. Well, here's the monolingual answer. Caribbean dialects of Spanish don't produce interrogative inversion. So what are we, even if we compare ourselves to monolinguals, native speakers? Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Okay? So we're going to bring these differences to the forefront and justify them. You are a native speaker. You're a Turkish language learner. Okay? So this fosters a general openness of acceptance and individual variation. So I'm going to pass it on to another word order activity, Jesse, having.
Okay, so I'm going to continue the ideas that Josh has already been presenting on this this sort of sentence scramble activity. So in your packet, the first activity that we have is more, I'll come back to the word order one, but this one is another activity that we did for Boy and Bar, and I wanted to kind of highlight this and have some more, another tangible activity for y'all to hold on to and maybe use in your own classroom. The point of these activities is that you can get students to produce language, and then you can also have them comparing their own language to corpus. It can be a bilingual corpus, a native speaker corpus, and so both of these have fostered that. So here we're using Por en Para. It's a Spanish 1 class for heritage speakers, bilingual bicultural speakers. And so we've developed, so it's a flipped classroom model. So if you are familiar at all with the flipped classroom model through the Khan Academy, where basically students are given sort of the instructional piece to do at home, and then the classroom is spent doing more of the engaged activities and working with the material. So at UT, we're developing some of these resources. So the students at home watch a video, sort of an instructed video, where they follow along in a packet. And actually you have the packet that they start with at home. They go through a guide. Well, in this video, I'm the one who's guiding them through, just try this activity, here are the answers, here's why. There's like a pause time for them to figure things out. pre-activity, probably about 30 minutes for them to complete at home. Then they come to class prepared, and then in class they can they already have some idea of what we're going to be talking about. They've run through maybe some of the more prescriptive rules at home, and then we can start looking at, if they had any questions, what was wrong, or what they liked about it, and then we start comparing to the bilingual corpus. So we use at UT2, we're working, not us specifically, but some researchers, Barbara Bullock and Jacqueline Toribio, are working on the Spanish in Texas Corpus project, where they have tons of videos from bilingual speakers from all over Texas. Okay, so this is actually in Josh's class. So they come and they watch this video.
Creo que eso fue algo muy importante para mí. Fue difícil. ¿Alguna vez fuiste discriminado por ser un inmigrante latino? Sí, muchas veces. Muchas veces me dijeron cosas por querer hablar español en un país en el que se habla inglés. Me llamaron de todo, hasta mojado, por hablar mi idioma. Entonces sí tuve esas experiencias en abundancia. Y bueno, ya sabiendo eso, ¿qué has hecho tú para no dejar que eso siga sucediendo? Bueno, creo que personalmente no sé si yo he hecho mucho para asegurarme de que esto no le suceda a otras personas, a otros inmigrantes. Creo que lo que sí hice fue alzar mi voz, levantar mi voz, decir algo. Me acuerdo muchas veces siendo niño, simplemente bajaba la cabeza y no decía nada. Y una vez pero después de tantas veces me cansé y creo que lo que yo he hecho es no dejar que me digan cosas, no dejar que me digan algo en ofender.
Okay, so even though this activity is linguistically focused or meta-linguistically focused, we have a rich language example for them to discuss. So then Josh starts by taking the first sociolinguistic awareness.
Es interesante, ¿no? Después de nuestra discusión, ¿quién me puede dar un ejemplo? Como, ¿qué dijo? Hablar, como el video de la clase pasado. Entonces, ¿qué podemos decir? Depende de tu dialecto. Muchas personas dicen hablar, unas dicen hablar, y a veces queremos dar énfasis, podemos también decir hablar. Entonces, la lengua siempre se está evolucionando, las personas hablan de una forma diferente. Dentro del mismo dialecto también. Okay,
so then they can even start to look at these issues with other people's language versus their own language. Why does language vary? A lot of these students have come to class not understanding why they've been mocked or mimicked for the Spanish that they come to class with. So we hope to sort of give them some understanding of why language may vary, why your language may vary, even for the person you're sitting next to who may come from a very similar situation as you. And then we can look at metalinguistic competition.
Digo para o por para. ¿Por qué? ¿Alguien puede decir un poquito más? Solo es una palabra, causa, pero ¿qué significa causa?
Sus acciones son lo que hacen que sean.
Entonces, por como a causa de algo así, casi un sinónimo en este caso. Okay. Número 2, me dijeron cosas por querer hablar español. Okay. ¿Por en este caso? Causa. ¿Estamos de acuerdo? Razón, ¿qué más? Causa, motivo.
Okay, so then they can start to dig in and be able to explain maybe why, become aware of this, just develop meta-linguistic competence, and then be able to articulate. As you can see, Josh is not allowing them to sit on the surface. Let's dig in and kind of get behind where, see what's going on with some of these issues. So then, okay, so that was a really good activity. I felt like it worked out really well. There's always plenty of opportunity for follow-up, but I think it just lends itself to so many layers within. We can look at the grammar and the language, but we can also get into a lot of these issues that are really relevant to our heritage speakers in our classes. So as Josh talked about before too, we also have this word order activity that we have been working with, also to inspire them to produce language, but then to analyze their language in the language of others, to create this awareness of differences and similarities, to discuss that, to form hypotheses, and to see why they do things and how they do it. So here we just have the production part again, but you have these in your activity. So Josh and I have done them individually. We've mashed our target sentences together. You can do it with so many different things. I chose adverb placement. Josh was looking at embedded clauses, embedded questions. So I was just kind of curious as to where bilinguals would place adverbs in these sentences, in transitive sentences with subject, verb, and object. And then they can analyze their language, they engage in discussion, and then we can do follow-up activities. We can talk about bilingualism, we can talk about bilingual grammars, we can talk about monolingual grammars and how they do it. And we'll see in a minute. We can compare these results maybe to a native speaker corpus and see what kind of results come out. So here's an example of two advanced heritage speakers who are in the process of both resolving differences and developing metalinguistic competency throughout this activity. So we have two speakers, female 22-year-old, a male 23-year-old, one from Houston, Texas, and the other from Eagle Pass. We just give them a quick little background survey just to have some information about where they're coming from, where their Spanish is coming from. So they rated their proficiency. So both have rated themselves fairly high. So a lot of confidence about the way they speak. This is based on an average of their self-rated speaking, reading, writing, and listening skills. And then the amount of Spanish they had at home growing up. So we just had to give us a little bit of information. She says almost always in Spanish at home. He says mostly in English at home, actually. So we may begin to expect some differences, even though they're both heritage language learners sitting in the same class, right? Years spent in a Spanish-speaking country. He says he's never been. She said yes, but didn't really specify how often it went. And so then for this activity, I was looking at how many of them placed the adverb. If you're thinking about adverb placement in Spanish versus English, if we say something like, María encontró fácilmente el edificio, Maria found the building easily, or Maria easily found the building. So where do they place it in relationship to the object of the sentence in English? Anyway, so we have a distinct difference. She's saying 3 of them went pre-object, and he's saying 3 of them went post-object. So in English, what we know is more or less that verb and object combination are really, they're tightly linked. So it's hard to break up a verb and its object in English, but in Spanish it's much more canonical. So this is just some of their transcripts that I've taken out here. And we can kind of read them. This is them resolving differences. So she starts and she says, no más encontré 2 oraciones que siento que aún puedo llevar una alternativa. So they start to go back and forth. We can already notice that activities like this present face-threatening acts, like you're going to be critiquing my language, right? If like, I don't barely know you, or maybe I do, but anyway, that's a very sensitive issue. So this activity does offer the opportunity for both of them to take the role of critiquer and being critiqued. But they also have the chance to defend themselves a little bit, which what it ends up leading into is it starts, for me it seems like it starts kind of abrupt, like, oh wait, what are you saying? Because I didn't even think there's another possibility. And then they kind of get into a little bit of, oh wait, okay, maybe it could be different, maybe they're both right. And then they start to have to think, wait, I thought it would be this way, and you do it does sound good. Are they both acceptable? Are there different ways of saying the same thing? And that's kind of where we get to throughout these. It's too quiet to hear, really. for?
Tengo un producto, puede ser como puedes mover el sujeto aquí en cada situación, como o Julia odiarías a su jefe menos, pero eso es como una comparación. Okay. Creo que suena mejor así, es una mejor estructura hacerlo así. Pero como usted dijiste que la otra opción está bien, pero no se suena bien, o sí suena bien, pero es mejor hacerlo así. Okay. Y ¿qué más? Pues todo hiciste bien, yo creo que sí.
I'm wondering what you notice about these interactions that they're having, like in this case, where he now takes the sort of the role of the leader here and has to critique her language. Or, I mean, is there anything interesting, noteworthy?
He's trying to be as polite and not as like, he's not trying to attack her.
Yeah.
That's why he's trying to be as indirect with his language too.
Yeah. So, and I think it's a good opportunity for them. Sometimes you're in uncomfortable situations. Maybe as a pragmatic exercise, how do you deliver sort of bad news or a critique to somebody? It's sort of a post hoc way to think about this activity, but if they do have to use indirect speech and maybe employ the subjunctive, and I think yeah. Anything else?
There are moments when they seem to be speaking more with themselves than with the other person.
Mm-hmm. So
they're analyzing within themselves, and it's coming out in an auditory fashion.
Definitely, a lot like that internal monologue is on.
Exactly.
Right. They're working through this. Maybe it's like he doesn't really know how to even tell her why he thinks it's right or wrong. She kind of has some of the terminology he's looking for, but right in the end, they're still not sure what to do with it. But it is a good way for them to kind of think about these things more overtly. A lot of times I think we hand students activities and we say, look, check your answers. And they kind of think, oh, I read mine and she read hers. I'm not really sure if it was fine, but whatever. But I think that critical step of like making them sit and physically analyze each other's work, and then, I don't know, maybe this, I don't know, it's a little artificial, but it does really make them talk more about really what's going on here in better ways than with better success than I've had with just saying, okay, now swap papers and see what each other had. But I like, it's good. You're getting at what's going on in the processing stage of the development of this metalinguistic competence and just understanding of this. So when they took this little survey, they described what they thought adverbs were. I'm sure I know about it, but can't describe it well. They can go anywhere. Better when placed directly after the verb. Actually, that's not bad. That's actually probably the most, that's like the best answer we got. Not much, I guess I just had an instinct. These are actually second language learners who, even with second language learners, these are great activities because they're not really, these are some of they get to have the me suena opportunities. I just have an instinct, I guess. Oh, they're weird. They go next to verbs, or they complement the verbs, but usually end in ente, but ayer is one too. So this is the kind of, and these are like fourth year, ready to graduate, post-study abroad students, right? And they're still struggling with adverbs. So a lot of this stuff has just been left to be, they're a little unaware. So this was just back to this one. This was more focusing on then the development of the metalinguistic competence, getting out some of these structures. Now we're actually having to use this terminology. Right. So then this is another pair. actually CH here, she's 20, she was born in Monterrey, Mexico. She didn't move to the United States until she was 10, but she didn't start schooling, and when she started schooling, it was purely in English. She rated herself at 4, she had obviously Spanish always at home. And then MA here, she was 21-year-old female from San Diego, California. A little bit lower, but pretty high self-rated proficiency, mostly Spanish at home. She said she didn't start speaking English until she went to school, which is often the case. And she's only spent a little bit of time, like a month in El Salvador, on a vacation with her family. Although very strong Spanish speaker, and actually I TA'd one of her civilization courses. I gotten to know her a little bit. And I actually TA'd for one of her Intro to Hispanic Linguistics course. So both very good, fluid, you carry on a very fluid, unilingual Spanish conversation with them. But striking differences in their choice of adverb placement, even despite the fact that, maybe monolinguals and raised in a Spanish-speaking environment would have been more like this, she still is placing them differently. So these differences can lead to great discussions about why our languages, similar or different. So again, just some examples here. I don't have the audios for these. But they start going through each of these. Okay, these sound fine, or maybe this one, but I think they both sound fine. Kind of the point, I'll kind of move this along a little bit, but the point that ends up being is, they talk about both and they consider both, and in the end, they accept both. They say, I think that probably sounds fine, I like the way I say it, but I think they're probably both. No es decir que tú estás mal, pero sí. Okay, por ejemplo, esa, en la número 2, en la número 4, ¿verdad? Okay, podría estar, so they consider, and at the end, they say, pero pienso que podría ser de las dos formas, están correctos, yeah, okay. And then again, we get a look, here I'll come back to the meta-linguistic development, same kind of thing going on, yeah, pero al igual, yeah, en esos dos que decía mente, puede ser viceversa, we get a lot of real language from these students that we can also look at and see what they're doing. But I think the most important thing that Josh is sort of bringing up, and I think Lydia will hit on it too, is that as we help them develop their metalinguistics and we take them to these activities, they are really just looking at language, and then they're looking at others' language, and then they're starting to understand it a little bit better. Maybe I sound different, but it's not because I'm wrong always or that it's weird. It's just this is the way we can help them. This is the way bilinguals develop. This is the way monolinguals develop. It gives them the power then to make the decisions about how you want to sound. You can have sort of self-compassion and learn that your language is, like, you have developed your language in a certain way, and there's nothing to be ashamed about that. But then now, from that perspective, we can come back and you can make a powerful decision about whether you want to keep talking the way you talk and whatever to everybody else, or you can decide, I want to sound more like this, or I want to sound more like this, or the same way as second language learners, we often make a decision about, I want to try to sound Chilean or Ecuadorian, or I'm fine sounding like, Wisconsinite speaking Spanish. So again, here what do we have? Yo nada más porque con el, por ejemplo, es que está describiendo, like, it's describing, what is this? El adverbio está describiendo al verbo. So we're getting some good stuff. Okay, the adverb is describing the verb. Okay, we're like starting to hover around it a little bit. And this is stuff that you can take your students to the next level and you can help them. So we could take like the Real Academia corpus and we can search these adverbs and we present the results. Like here were the learner results. Here were the corpus results. So in the learner results, we had quite a mix of back and forth between pre-object and post-object. Despite what you would maybe imagine from English, when you say things like, Jane easily found the building, Jane quickly read the newspaper, there was only one token of pre-verbal adverb. So they're not really relying on Spanish for that at all, or on English, so that's interesting. But they are sticking to this post-verbal, either pre-object or post-object, and they're kind of mixed. But the corpus is it leans pretty heavily towards the pre-object position for these adverbs. The mente adverbs, which could be reconceptualized as a sentential adverb that scopes over the entire sentence versus just that verb phrase, maybe that's what's going on here a little bit, but there is a definite distinction in tendencies, and this is just knowledge, information. Information is power. These results were from Mexican Spanish too. And so I did a little analysis here, right? The learner results are significantly different than the corpus results, which we would expect based on those results. So we can look at the trends. We can look at, by the learners, they're statistically relying on weight. If the adverb is heavier, it's going to the end of the sentence. If it's lighter, they're interpolating it more often. There was no difference between heritage language learner performance and second language learner performance on adverbs statistically, so they're not making two different groups at the advanced level, but they are cueing on similar things. And so it's just, we get a little bit of insight into what's going on for these students through these activities. And that's kind of all I have for now. We'll pass it on to Lydia.
All right, so I've been working in bilinguals for about 6 years. And when I first started, I adapted what was in the textbooks, which is a very remedial model. This is right, this is wrong, don't use that word, doesn't exist, etc., etc., and I was very emphatic about it. And as I started to teach, I realized that this kind of diminished the students' power of the language that they had. And I started to do a lot of research, and then I met these guys. And so we started having a lot of conversations about what we could do in the classroom to really get these kids thinking about the way they're using language and how language can transform them. So they showed you the grammatical part of what these conversations have resulted in. I'm going to show you the vocabulary part. One of my biggest complaints about textbooks for heritage speakers is that they only provide long lists of words that they have to memorize and then learn how to use. But it doesn't really get them thinking about the different variations of how these words are used. So I decided to create an activity that moved away from these lexical activities that promoted vocabulary lists, memorization, etc. And also allow time for students to think about the word and what context they were using it. And finally, to help them become aware that language has power, and it creates knowledge, it communicates information, and it definitely manipulates social situations. So for example, what I like to tell them is, when I go to Mexico, I'm a fresa, and I change everything I say to sound fresa. Ay, por favor, es que no es posible, blah, 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 blah. Because my friends in Mexico are fresas. And if I don't talk like a fresa, then I'm pocha, because I mixed my language with the United States. Right? So in order to differentiate myself from that, I have to play that role. So when I give them that example, they're like, oh, you can do that? You can change your personality according to your circles? And then from there, with this in mind, I designed this activity that has 4 parts. The first one was about the use of language, the awareness, and I grabbed a comic from this Mexican cartoonist called Kino, and they had to read it, and it has a couple of guided questions. Then they had the theater in which they had to put this word into use. Then they had to exercise reflective judgment, in which they had to think about what was hard about creating a skit, why was it hard? And finally, give them a definition from a library, from a textbook, and have them question that definition and say, is this guy really right? Is this the correct way of talking about language? So that they can really assess and comment the dictionary definitions. So, with that, the plan for the class was 60 minutes. Each student had 50 minutes for each section. They worked individually on all sections except for the skit, and after each section, students volunteered to share their responses with the rest of the class. And then the activity was turned in at the end so I could evaluate it. So in the first part, if you look at the last few pages of your packet, we have this comment. And the instructions were just to read it and complete the sentence that followed. So the comment says, eso es una serie, no soy tu tío, hoy no tengo pelas. Yo, escúchame, Paricholi, tengo cara yo del tío Camboy, entrégueme todo el dinero. Joder, ¿qué no ves que estoy hecha patatas con el ordenador? ¿Ordenar? Pues yo, como su ordenador, le ordeno que me entregue toda la lana. Ostras, tío, que no se hacen farutas. Coge y vete ya. Bueno, a ninguna se lo he negado nunca. ¿Y tú tan directa? Órale. Solo como antecedente, amigo, coger en España no es lo mismo que acá. Coger allá significa ganar. Bueno, se parecen algo, ¿no? So, granted, the comic is a little elevated, but it gets diverse meanings to the verb coger. At the end of the comic, the barber says that the secretary's use of coger is similar to his use. What do you think he says? Even in English, because a lot of them don't understand. So some of the outcomes, the students were able to identify the main misunderstandings that derived from the use of coger. Most were unaware that it was popular used in Spain with the meaning was to grab or to take. However, ironically, when asked what were some synonyms, all of them, the 23 students, said the word coger had sexual meaning, yet when they asked them, they said it was calar, tomar, escoger, recoger, seleccionar. So even though they didn't know it meant something else, they were able to produce the synonyms for it. The questions led to some students to categorize coger as a product of the evolution of language. Some students of Mexican heritage referred to it as albur. When asked by other non-Mexican heritage students what it meant, one explained that it's a pun or a word with little meaning, which in turn produced a discussion of other words like chile, papaya, panocha, cocha, pomade, etc. And this was something I did not intend to happen, but it was very enriching for our class discussion. Especially because when we get to the taller del teatro, the original instructions were to, create a situation in which they had to use the word coger in either whatever situation they preferred. And somebody had to be from Spain, somebody had to be from Latin America, and the misunderstanding had to arise. But because of this board discussion we had, I opened it up and told them they could use whatever word they wanted. And basically the instructions for that were very simple. Well, somebody has to be from Spain, somebody from Latin America, choose a setting, the office, the bar, school, so they can practice the use of register. Write a brief outline of your skit and practice it, and then present your skit to the rest of the class. So, this is one of the skits. Students are able to be creative, not only about coger, but also about the words they combine and find. But this one is about coger, so here we go.
Oh, ok, estamos en una oficina. Ok, y estos son osos. Ok. Osos. Like teddy bears. Osos de peluche. Ajá. Estamos haciendo, que vamos a hacer un experimento, ¿verdad? Para que escojan los osos que les gustan a las niñas.
Sí, los más suavecitos.
Sí, vamos a tratar a la siguiente niña. Hola. Hola, buenas tardes, ¿cómo estás, mija? Ok, mija, este experimento es para que cojas un oso que te guste más.
Que esté loco.
Sí, coge el oso que te gusta más, el que esté más suave.
¿Qué tipo de experimento es?
No, es un malentendido. Nosotros quieren que agarras lo que quieres.
Okay, so as you can see, they have a lot of fun with this. And they really got creative. Like, some of these skits were out of this world. But anyway, once they presented the skit, they had to think about what was the hardest part of making this skit? First skit you like the most, explain why. If you were to find yourself in a situation where there was a misunderstanding, causing a difference in meaning, and use of the word coger, how would you improvise to mediate the situation? Because a lot of them don't know how to correct, as you saw through Jesse's and Josh's presentation. They get really nervous, and then they start looking at the floor, and they just don't know how to act. So part of this is to get them empowered into how to mediate these kinds of situations. And the results were that some students said that the hardest thing about creating the parodies was being embarrassed, not because they didn't know what coger meant, but because they didn't understand how to use it. So they didn't understand the albur, right? Which just happens a lot. A lot of my friends who grew up here and go to Mexico, and they're hanging out with my cousins who love to give alburs to everybody, get really confused, like, wait, what? Why are you saying Chile is funny? I don't get it. So that's part of the reason these students felt embarrassed not knowing how to use it. Also, most mentioned that if they found themselves in a situation where there was a misunderstanding about lexical narration, they would simply explain the difference, and I'll let you see through their own words. Somebody said, I would improve with an explanation of what lexical varieties are in different countries. If I understand what they're talking about, I don't think I would correct them because each culture has their own ways of speaking. But if I feel confused, well then I would definitely ask so that I can kind of clear the doubt and learn something new. I would explain that the word coger has two meanings, and I would tell them that, explain what context each can be used. So, I mean, at this point, they're already talking about the use of this word within a social context, which is other heritage books don't do. Then, we went to the fourth part. So we have this definition that I got from the Esencial Claves sobre el Uso y Estilo by Sandro Cohen. And here, Sandro Cohen says that Coger es un verbo transitivo que significa, entre muchas cosas, asistir, agarrar o tomar. No tiene nada de malo usar este verbo. Cuenta con un total de 32 acepciones en el artículo enmendado para la tercera edición de la TRAE. Solo una de ellas tiene una connotación sexual. 31. Intransitivo, vulgar, América, realizar el acto sexual. También se usa pronominalmente en este sentido, pero no se menciona en el diccionario. No tenemos por qué desechar 31 acepciones porque una es sexual y además vulgar. ¿Y qué tiene de malo que una palabra posee una acepción vulgar, sexual vulgar? No estamos obligados a usarla de esa manera, sino que hay que perder ese miedo a las palabras y aprender a usarlas bien, cada una en su contexto correcto. So this is not the most formal definition because there was other ones that were really very formal. It's still accepting some of the different variations, right? And then students had to comment on this. The majority of the students agree with Cohen's definition, supporting the varied use of coger according to the context, and there were a few that we really reflected about the use of language and the political implications of this. And this part was fascinating to me. This student, for example, says, pero ¿quién es el dueño de los idiomas a decir que es propia? ¿Qué es la acepción verdadero? Yo no estoy de acuerdo que nada más hay un significado de cada palabra que debemos usar. El idioma identifica una persona para distinguir las otras culturas o países. I mean, this is pure critical thinking here. I had no idea my students had at the beginning of this activity. I really thought they were just going to say, oh, I agree with Colin, he's right. No, I mean, they really started thinking about how language is used. Another student said, creo que todas las formas de español necesitan ser recognizadas, pero al mismo tiempo, ¿cómo podemos reconocer todas las formas de palabras sin crear jerarquías? Estoy de acuerdo con Cohen que no estamos obligados a usar todas las palabras de esa manera. No es su opinión. Pero mientras que Cohen expresó su opinión, lo devaluó otros usos de la palabra. So they're understanding that the fact that he called the American use vulgar is evaluating. And that shows how they're starting to think about language. This student said, no, porque aunque un diccionario no menciona algo, una palabra todavía puede tener varios significados culturales en diferentes contextos. And again, I mean, this all from teaching them how coger works in context. And this activity led students in various directions. We had jokes, questionable words and different meanings, questions relating personal experiences to examples. Una vez, for example, a student said, una vez estaba en casa de mi tía y mi tío le dijo a mi papá, compadre, no deje que la comadre me pase el chile, and they started laughing, and I didn't know what they were laughing about, and so I was like, what is chile? So like I drew a chile on the board, and they started laughing, like, oh, I get it. And everybody's like sharing stories. I have a student from Colombia who shared the use of papaya. Other students didn't know what papaya meant in double meaning. And so they started to share this knowledge. Then, on top of that, we go into the political implications of language and identity politics, which I think is really important for the heritage speakers. And as a bilingual instructor, it's important to embrace students' contributions to the activity and allow them time to reflect on their findings and observations. So, for example, I had a student that said, bueno, pasarse de verga, that's the double entender, right? And I was like, okay, tell me why. If you're going to bring it to the class, tell me why. And then he was sitting there, and he couldn't think about why it would be double meaning. He said, well, it's kind of vulgar. I was like, exactly. How is it double entender then? And the other students were like, no, it's not double entender. It doesn't work that way. It's just a bad word. And so them themselves start to categorize the use of their own language. And while this activity definitely allows students to flirt with the dirty parts of Spanish because it brings up the pipicaca in all of us, it can lead to more higher discussions that guide students to become aware of the power the language has to create knowledge, communicate, and represent cultural paradigms and interact with others. This is one of the activities I made. I made others with Excitar to talk about calcos. Even though these words have different meanings in different contexts, they have these deep-rooted political implications that if they learn how to manage, they can, when they go on to the professional worlds or whatever, they can explain to people in a nice, polite way why it's a misunderstanding, as opposed to just kind of going with a simple can't. And I'm going to turn back to Josh now.
Well, I think we planned on speaking until 4:30, so we can just stop here. We'd have to be happy to take questions. But again, thank you very much for having us.
Some of you have to leave, but feel free to stay and ask questions, and we can just open it up. But I also wanted to thank Andrea. I forgot to thank Andrea Woodard for all of her hard work.
We'll just packets be useful? Do you think you'll be able to incorporate that? Is there, maybe I'll ask you a question.
The transcripts for, so on the back of the word order packet, I put like the last step can be, we did different things. We did one where we come in more of like a formal linguistics approach, observe this sentence, and compare the two and see, what do you think, looking at adverbs versus adjectives, and can you identify what's the role of each? Gets really linguistic-y or really sort of grammarian in there. But also, why would this sentence be said in this context versus this sentence? And they can look at issues of word weight, and you can get into all that. And then the other one is just more like a holistic discussion about what they got out of the activity. So I try to put both of those in. The transcripts for the bilingual corpus, the videos aren't active right now. They will be soon. They're working on getting all of that up for Spanish and Texas corpus data. But the transcripts from the videos we use are on the back. Sometimes it can just be a good reading activity too. Literacy is a big part of these classes. It's a big part of the formation of these students.
But those videos, there'll be hundreds of them, right? And they'll be completely open for everyone in just a few months. And they'll be very, very user-friendly, and you'll be able to sort of remove words and create your own exercises from them very shortly.
Do you want to, while you're talking about it, do you want to, for anyone who's not familiar with Coral, just maybe tell them just a little bit about it?
Yeah. We have this open resources sort of institution program at the University of Texas, and recently we received a large grant headed by Professor Bullock and Toribio to document Spanish in Texas. So those two professors, as well as many helpers, have been traveling all around Texas doing interviews. These are all video interviews. That's the beautiful thing of it. We have the transcripts. They'll all be transcribed, and sort of the words will follow what they're saying. And you have all just various heritage speakers and bilinguals around the state that you'll be able to access. It's very user-friendly for researchers as well as teachers. It'll be sort of two ways to navigate this program. And there's a website, just Spanish in Texas. You can sort of Google that and you'll come across it. And it's really, really exciting. So you should check into that towards the end of the summer when it's released for everyone.
And Coral actually has other languages too, right?
They do. Yeah, it's open resources for several languages. Yeah, the director is in French.
We have another question over here.
Oh, please.
How do you, I know this has nothing to do with the content of your courses, or maybe it does, how do you convince bilingual heritage speakers to sign up for your classes? Because, let me give you a scenario of why this is problematic, and I've seen this fail at lots of colleges and universities across Texas. The heritage speakers and Spanish speakers will think that those courses are harder. Why should they take a course that's harder if they can just take the regular for the non-Spanish speaking, get their requirement done, and get on with things? When that's not good for them, that's not what they need. They don't need that class. Right. Because they're not doing first language acquisition, or second language acquisition. They're doing first language acquisition.
Or a combination of the two.
Yeah, or a combination of the two.
Yeah.
So they need, obviously from what I've seen, obviously you understand that their objectives are different, your approach needs to be different, everything needs to be different. How do you get those kids at UT to sign? I know that's practical, but how do you get them to sign up for that class?
It's been a work in progress. That's the short answer. So when I started, it was two of us, and we would go to each classroom and give them a discussion about it. And so,
Each classroom?
we would go to different Spanish classrooms, regular Spanish classes, because we were trying to get them out of those classes into our classes.
Okay.
And we would go, at the beginning of the semester, basically, because one or two people would sign up for our classes. And these are classes I need to have 10 people to make, otherwise it cancels one. So we would go to each of these regular Spanish classrooms and go in there and say, hi, I teach this heritage speakers class, and for example, if I say, it's like, I would go on the board and say, it's not the same to say mama que mama. Like, play with that. And then they're like, oh, so you guys do accents in there? So yes, we do accents, and we also teach you kind of how to, think about language, and we do.
Mientras el que implementa
La maestra nos hace hablar en español entre los estudiantes.
Bueno, sí, soy puro güero.
Un método más avanzado.
Y me dijeron que sería mejor tomar esta clase en bilingüe que en clase regular, porque yo vengo de una ciudad donde hablamos español y todo, yo crecí hablando español y eso, me recomendaban esta clase por lo mismo, porque no necesito empezar desde el principio de las convenciones y eso, porque ya más o menos tengo los básicos.
Pues no inventa tu casa, ponte a ver los Simpsons hasta la madrugada.
Pero en todo el mundo, en Puerto Rico no vamos a oír mucho las S, en español tenemos la Z, en cállate, en lugar de cállate.
Este curso es diferente porque todos hablamos en español, respondemos en español, preguntamos en español. La maestra los explica todo en español. La clase es en español. Y es lo que a veces necesitamos los bilingües, porque los concentramos mucho. O sea, podemos hablar a lo mejor en español, pero no académico, y es lo que necesitamos ayuda en.
Se ha vuelto una mala moda.
Lo importante que todos deberían saber sobre las clases bilingües es que ellas no solamente son para estudiantes bilingües, son para los estudiantes avanzados que no tienen ni una gotita de sangre hispana. Así que esa clase es la prioridad para mí.
Y cuando, entonces, cuando me moví para Austin, para la escuela, aquí no usaba el español para nada. Entonces regresaba para Laredo y hazte cuenta que mi español no ¿cómo puedo decir? Went bad. Así que no me acordaba de bastantes palabras y me dio vergüenza ser mexicana, bueno, Mexican American, y no saber comunicarme bien en español, y me dio bastante vergüenza. Y dije, no, pues hay que aprender a escribirlo mejor, porque leerlo, hasta leyéndolo, hay palabras que me quedo como, ¿qué es eso?
¿Cuál es la partícula leve? Sabemos que la palabra consta de sílabas, ¿verdad? Ma, ña, na. ¿Por qué podemos separar entre ellos?
Definitivamente lo recomendaría porque te sientes más a gusto, como en casa. Porque todo el mundo que está en esta clase lo habla en la casa y yo creo que está muy bien diseñado a eso.
And that was 4 years ago that we did this video. Now the program, we're designing the bilingual track to be, instead of 3 classes, to be 2. So it's a really accelerated time. They take the placement test. If their diagnosis is bilingual, they go to 610. It's going to be 612, 604. And then after that, they go into 612. And then from there on, they're done with the language requirements. So it's a lot faster. And I think that's also a good selling point because we don't have a lot of money to be studying language courses. So that's what we've been doing.